Have you ever heard someone pleading for assistance and been so moved by the sound that you couldn't ignore it? The story of Thomas Hartley will set you off on a journey you never thought of one winter morning. A pain roar came from deep within the woods for a veterinarian living in a remote forested region. Led him to an unfamiliar and heartbreaking location, a mother bear with bleeding eyes. In her tiny cub trap close to his choice to assist them in setting him on a journey of life or death, a journey through the unforgiving wilderness that tested his compassion at heart and encouraged patience. This is a journey of rediscovering hope, not just a story of saving a wild creature and establishing a strong connection between nature and humanity. Are you ready? Let's get started. Every layer of clothing seemed to be soaked by the biting winter cold, and the morning was still shrouded in mist. As he stepped out of his tiny body, Thomas Hartley pulled his thick coat more around himself with each breath. The world outside the wooden cabin was very quiet, with everything blanketed by snow. The air felt frozen in time as it moved from the village's narrow paths to its rooftops. Thomas loved mornings like these, and he was only broken by the crunch of snow beneath his boots. For him, nature was more than just a place to live. It was a dependable life partner. He occasionally thought that the animals he handled were destroying the forest around him, including the whistling wind, were all extensions of his own soul. But a unique sound broke the silence this morning. He had never heard a cry from deep within the forest before. It wasn't the hoot of an owl or the bellow of a deer. It was a haunting, very sorrowful sound that sent a shudder down his spine. The cry echoed again, clearer this time, and he stopped listening intently. A part of Thomas, who was more desperate, wanted to ignore it and withdraw to the warmth of his fireplace. However, he believed that his heart, which was always open to all creatures, wouldn't permit it. And he stepped back inside the cabin and grabbed a first aid kit because, as always, he felt he had to act. A small knife and flashlight for protection. Not attacking, he left a brief note on the table that read, "If I don't return by the nightfall, call for a rescue team. I've gone into the forest." Snow weighed down the branches and turned every exhaled breath into a wisp of fog, giving the forest a strange beauty in the winter. However, that beauty felt foreboding today, with the trees appearing silent and dark. Thomas moved slowly, pausing frequently to listen, and it seemed like every step he took was swept away by the shadows. He was guided farther into the woods by the cry, which was sometimes far away and other times close. Though deep down, his mind was racing with possibilities. Could it be a lost dog or an injured deer? Eventually, through the dense mist, he noticed a huge bear curled up on the snow, confirming that this sound didn't belong to anything familiar. Fear and pain filled its eyes as its powerful body trembled and locked onto Thomas. He knew he was standing in front of a wild animal, yet its gaze was unfriendly, and his heart sank. Just asking for assistance, Thomas cautiously slowed his steps while keeping a safe distance. Dark red blood seeped from the mother bear's injured leg, discoloring the snow beneath her. However, what shocked him even more was what was beneath a huge fallen rock. Despite her severe injuries, a tiny bear cub was trampled and thrashed every week, releasing faint, pitiful cries. Thomas was frozen, his heart heavy, and the mother bear had positioned her massive body protectively over her cub. The mother bear's eyes were full of despair and the faintest glimmer of hope, but a part of him wanted to walk away. He murmured softly, "It's okay, stay calm." Perhaps the words were more for him to calm his nerves, and crouched a little, because he knew the bear couldn't understand him. He took a closer look at the situation and saw that the big rock had fallen across the cub's leg. The accident appeared to have been caused by an avalanche or a fallen branch, but how could he free the cub? She sat down slowly, making every movement deliberate, without frightening the mother bear or worse, inciting her to attack Thomas. And gently, in an attempt to win the bear's trust, he reached into his bag and took out a piece of dry bread. Not to eat. He spoke in the calmest voice he could manage while holding out his hand. I wanted to assist the mother bear, who was watching him. Her wide eyes were wary, and she gave him a low growl but did not approach him. Thomas assumed he had been given a fragile chance. As his breath mixed with the heavy, he edged closer with each step, feeling as though eternity was stretching. Labored breast of the bear, how man and beast may not have been able to understand each other at that moment. When he got close enough to touch the rock, he revealed an unsaid connection, a thread of trust and hope. Thomas paused and looked about, wondering if he could lift it because it was much too heavy. He then quietly sorrying himself for not packing better tools. He will work this out. He nodded at him out of fear and doubt, but he said as much to reassure himself as the bear. Could he have saved them both when he flicked his eyes from the mother bear to her cub? He came to the realization that even the smallest act of devotion could have enormous power during that fleeting moment. His determination to figure out how the sky above was overcast was strengthened by that realization. The gray clouds hanging heavy overhead were a sign that the weather was about to get worse. Only the mother bear's livid breaths broke the silence surrounding Thomas as he stood still in front of the enormous rock. Even with all of his strength, he knelt down and placed his hands on the rock to test its weight. Thomas mumbled his breath, creating little wisps in the freezing air, because he couldn't budge it, damn it. Despite the presence of a strange patient, he glanced across at the mother bear and noticed the tension in her eyes. Perhaps she didn't fully comprehend his intentions, but fortunately, she refrained from attacking him. There were only a few basic medical supply bags inside Thomas's backpack when he knelt down and opened it. None of the scissors and a few syringes were remotely sufficient for this circumstance, so he wondered why he had thrown himself into a part of him wanted to turn back, but his heart wouldn't allow it. It felt like an impossible mission. Listen to Thomas speak quietly in a calm, deep voice, as though addressing one of his patients. The mother bear stared at him. I'm not sure if I can do this, but I'm going to try. Thomas saw an odd connection as her big eyes seemed to register his words. Despite her understanding that he wasn't a threat, he started looking for something in the area. As he struggled through the snow, anything that could support a strong branch or a shift lever may be helpful. Unexpectedly, he remembered an afternoon years ago when he was a young boy. His father's weathered picture of him helping to save a deer that was trapped close to their house, however. The gentle hands that released the animal were etched into his mind. Perhaps such moments might occur. Had inspired him to pursue a career in veterinary medicine, Thomas thought to himself. Returning to the present, he noticed a sizable branch that was sturdy enough to use as a lever. After picking it up, he carefully put the branch down on the mother bear. The bear gave a low growl, but remained motionless. Easy now. I'm only attempting to assist, Thomas whispered in maintaining the softest possible voice. He placed one branch end beneath the rock's edge and braced himself, his muscles strained from pushing with everything he had. Despite the cold, the rock shifted just enough for the cub to sway weakly, leaving sweat on his forehead. Thomas gritted his teeth and poured all of his strength into a single last effort. Come on, just a little more. When the rock finally rolled aside, the exhausted Thomas collapsed onto the snow, freeing the cub. His body was exhausted from gasping for air, but his heart was filled with relief. In order to check on her cub, the mother bear immediately leaned down and used her large nose, gently licking its fur. The weak but alive cub lifted its tiny head and gave a faint whine, omitting soft growls as if to comfort it. Thomas had chosen this path because, as he watched the tense moment, he felt a warm sensation spread across his chest. To bring compassion where it was most needed by acting as a bridge between nature and humanity, however, the happiness was short-lived, as Thomas soon realized that the mother bear's injury was much worse than he had first believed. She would not have survived the night if she had not received prompt medical attention for the blood that was still leaking from her hind leg. As he cautiously approached to examine the wound, the bear grew louder, causing her body to stiffen in fear. Listen to what Thomas said as he backed away and raised his hands to indicate that he meant no harm. "I need your trust, okay?" His voice is low and soothing. "If I don't do anything, you won't make it." A part of the mother bear appeared, prepared to reject him as she gazed at him, her gaze conflicted. However, after what seemed like an eternity, another part, possibly the one that acknowledged the trust they had established, held her back. Thomas didn't waste another second as she lowered her head in a silent, regretful agreement. He swiftly collected his bandages and medical instruments, and he cleaned the wound with the utmost gentleness and care. Throughout the procedure, the mother bear never removed her eyes from him, and she tightly wrapped it to stop the bleeding. Thomas saw a quiet gratitude in those eyes that transcended fear. Thomas realized that he couldn't leave the bears here overnight, since they needed shelter, and time was running out as the sky became darker and the wind picked up. He spoke loudly to himself and the bears, and the mother bear observed him. "We have to move." Thomas packed up his tools and gestured toward the forest, perhaps sensing their intent even though he didn't understand what he was saying. Mom bear was hesitant, but when Thomas started to walk, "I'll take you somewhere safe." She moved with a limp as she slowly rose her massive body, and the cub got stuck at her side. A man and a mother bear were on a strange yet profoundly moving sight, and her cub, all bound by an unsaid bond of devotion, walking together through the snow-covered forest. Thomas was unable to assist them as they moved farther into the woods, but I wondered if he could actually pull this off. However, he always felt a renewed sense of determination when his gaze fell on the cub, who was fragile but resilient. This was a testament to the established bond between us and animals, not only about saving two of them. And nature serves as a reminder that sometimes all it takes to endure life is a small act of kindness. The air grew colder as the minute wind whirled through the trees, darkening the sky. Thomas pulled his coat tighter while carrying the biting chill of winter, but his thoughts were on the two creatures. The mother bear was silently following him, pushing forward step by step as it limped from her wound. Her boyfriend was clinging to her side, and he had no idea where he was taking them. All he knew was that he should stay outside any longer. Wasn't an option because a snowstorm was coming and none of them would make it through the night if they couldn't find shelter. As the wind grew, Thomas strained his ears, listening for any sound that the howling gusts may be carrying. He turned to look at the mother bear and her cub as he heard the faint sound of snow falling and the first swirling of the flakes. Each step seemed heavier than the last, and they both looked very exhausted, especially the mother. "Come on," Thomas murmured, her legs trembling as though they could give out at any moment. Perhaps she could sense the gentleness in his tone, even though he knew his words were useless and the bear couldn't understand him. Thomas turned on his flashlight as they ventured deeper into the forest and the darkness grew. He scanned the area and saw what appeared to be a small cave as the weak beam cut through the glow. A glimmer of hope ignited in his chest around the foot of a hill. It might be the rescue they so needed there. The wind grew fiercer, whipping snow, and a chaotic flurry, said he. Pointing ahead and quickening his pace, they arrived to the cave just as the storm started to rage in earnest, and that sting his exposed skin like tiny blisters. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief because it was compact, yet roomy enough to shelter all three of them for the night. He was aware that they weren't safe, but he had to make sure the storm wouldn't trap them and that the mother bear needed to rest and warm up. Inside the mother bear, she collapsed onto the cave floor and curled herself around her cub in a protective manner. Thomas felt a strange sensation in his chest as he watched them to protect it from the cold. The devotion of the mother, the courage and strength she displayed for her cub, moved him deeply. "You are truly amazing. I've never seen someone fight as hard as you do," he whispered as he sat down nearby. For a few moments, the mother bear raised her head to gaze at him, Her eyes were neither suspicious nor afraid. As if she had come to trust his presence, they instead carried a calm acceptance. Thomas carefully examined the wound, noting that the bandage he had previously applied was soaked through with blood. He opened his backpack and took out the last of his medical supplies because they needed to be replaced. He said softly, "This might hurt a little." His hands were moving quickly, yet gently, and the bear let out a low growl. Thomas could see she was in pain as he cleaned and rewrapped the wound, but she remained motionless. However, her patience complimented him, saying, "You're so strong." Thomas's voice was full of genuine admiration. For the creature in front of him, the snowstorm that night raged outside the cave. The wind, howling like a ferocious beast, blanketed everything in its path as it fell. Thomas leaned against the rock wall inside the cave and observed the mother bear and her cub. Despite the mother's continued protective wrapping of her body over her child, they appeared to be sleeping. Despite Thomas's exhaustion mounting and the chills seeping into his bones, a stronger feeling overcame his passion. He came to see that the power of love and sacrifice could overcome any hardship, whether it be human or animal. Despite her injuries, the mother bear had sacrificed everything for her cub, and Thomas was a mere human in the wilderness. Thomas stated gently that they will be all right as he had done everything in his power to assist them. Despite the harshness of nature, I swear that night when he rests on the mother bear with her cub, Thomas felt something he had never felt before as the wind howled and the bone grew cold. It was a bond formed without the need of words, a discovered connection to the wild creatures beside him. However, as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through. It was through faith and devotion that inside the small cave, the thick snow cast shimmering beams on the terraces. The gentle whisper of the wind blended with the gentle breaths of the mother bear and her cub. Thomas rubbed his eyes and sat up, feeling the aches that ran through his body, creating a fragile sense of calm. After a battle against nature last night, he looked at the mother bear and didn't think he had survived. Her wound was carefully bandaged, but he knew that without the right medical care, it wasn't enough. He couldn't leave her in the club here, since it was too dangerous and isolated, and she wouldn't fully recover. He murmured, his gaze lining on the small, fragile cub. "We have to do something." However, with lively eyes, the cub appeared to be the cause of the mother bear's continued fighting. And now that he had both of them as justifications for acting, Thomas stepped out of the cave and saw that the weather had improved. The sky was clearer, a sign of a new day, but the ground was still blanketed with snow. Since it would be difficult to persuade the villagers to assist, he made the decision to lead Mother Bear and her cub toward the village. Initially, the mother bear appeared hesitant, but when Thomas started to walk, he had no other option. Slowly, she followed the cub, staying by her side, as if she understood his intent. The three of them, a man, a mother bear with an injury, and a small cub, a living portrait of survival and compassion. Trudging through the snowy forest, Thomas had to stop several times to give the mother some rest because the trip back to the village took longer than anticipated. His heart ached every time she collapsed from exhaustion, but she always rose with determined eyes to keep going. When they finally arrived at the village's edge, his resolve grew stronger, and the smell of smoke curling from rooftops gave them a cozy feeling. The villagers had long viewed bears as threats, but Thomas knew what lay ahead wouldn't be a kind welcome. As Thomas and the bears emerged, intruders should be feared more than creatures in need of assistance. The first few villagers who saw them screamed and rushed to warn others or slammed doors. In a matter of minutes, a small group of people had gathered, displaying a mixture of suspicion and fear. "What are you doing, Thomas? Are you insane?" An older man yelled at you. Thomas raised his hands to calm the bears when he was brought into the village. "I wasn't bringing them here to hurt anyone." He stated that his voice was steady, but that the mother bear was hurt, and that she and her companion needed assistance. And I couldn't leave them, because we have kids in this village, and we can't aid wild bears. A woman called. Have you considered the fact that Thomas interrupted his gaze when meeting with the villager? As you are aware, I have been living and working here for years. Yet these creatures, this mother bear, put her life in danger to protect her cub because they're just as much a part of nature as we are. And I think we can help them. There was a heavy silence that was only broken by the gentle wind. Eventually, an elderly man stepped forward, his piercing eyes full of contemplation. After some of the villager exchanged uncertain glances. Thomas, you must assume responsibility if you genuinely think they deserve your assistance. None of us will put ourselves in danger for them, he said, but if you're willing to try. Thomas nodded, feeling a weak but essential sense of support, and we won't stand in your way. He led the bears to an empty livestock shed on the village's outskirts, promising to do everything in his power. After thoroughly cleaning it, he spread dry straw to make a cozy spot for the mother bear to rest. She was almost collapsing from exhaustion, yet her eyes never left Thomas, and her gaze was now free of suspicion. Thomas carefully attended to her wound with only trust and quiet gratitude. Upon closer examination, he discovered a little bone fracture that needed stabilization, requiring precise work. However, he always thought of the cub's bright eyes full of life and hope, whenever he felt hungry. Thomas committed himself to caring for the animals in the days that followed, which initially made the villagers suspicious. Some, including children, became curious and started observing from a distance, asking Thomas questions about the bears. He described the universal power of maternal love and the bond between the mother and cub. And it will be acceptable, Thomas said gently, to emphasize the significance of living in harmony with nature. Despite the harshness of nature, I swear that night when he rests on the mother bear with her cub, Thomas felt something he had never felt before as the wind howled and the bone grew cold. It was a bond formed without the need of words, a discovered connection to the wild creatures beside him. However, as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick layer. It was through faith and devotion. Snow casting shimmering beams on the small cave's treetops, the gentle whisper of the wind blended with the gentle breaths of the mother bear and her cub. Thomas rubbed his eyes and sat up, feeling the aches that ran through his body, creating a fragile sense of calm. After a battle against nature last night, he looked at the mother bear and didn't think he had survived. Her wound was carefully bandaged, but he knew that without the right medical care, it wasn't enough. He couldn't leave her in the club here, since it was too dangerous and isolated, and she wouldn't fully recover. He murmured, his gaze lining on the small, fragile cub. We have to do something. However, with lively eyes, the cub appeared to be the cause of the mother bear's continued fighting. And now that he had both of them as justifications for acting, Thomas stepped out of the cave and saw that the weather had improved. The sky was clearer, a sign of a new day, but the ground was still blanketed with snow. Since it would be difficult to persuade the villagers to assist, he made the decision to lead Mother Bear and her cub toward the village. Initially, the mother bear appeared hesitant, but when Thomas started to walk, he had no other option. Slowly, she followed the cub, staying by her side, as if she understood his intent. The three of them, a man, a mother bear with an injury, and a small cub, a living portrait of survival and compassion. Trudging through the snowy forest, Thomas had to stop several times to give the mother some rest because the trip back to the village took longer than anticipated. His heart ached every time she collapsed from exhaustion, but she always rose with determined eyes to keep going. When they finally arrived at the village's edge, his resolve grew stronger, and the smell of smoke curling from rooftops gave them a cozy feeling. The villagers had long viewed bears as threats, but Thomas knew what lay ahead wouldn't be a kind welcome. As Thomas and the bears emerged, intruders should be feared more than creatures in need of assistance. The first few villagers who saw them screamed and rushed to warn others or slammed doors. In a matter of minutes, a small group of people had gathered, displaying a mixture of suspicion and fear. "What are you doing, Thomas? Are you insane?" An older man yelled at you. Thomas raised his hands to calm the bears when he was brought into the village. "I wasn't bringing them here to hurt anyone." He stated that his voice was steady, but that the mother bear was hurt, and that she and her companion needed assistance. "And I couldn't leave them, because we have kids in this village and we can't aid wild bears." A woman called. "Have you considered the fact that Thomas interrupted his gaze when meeting with the villager? You know I'm not reckless. Yet these creatures have been a part of this place for years. I think we can do something to help them, because this mother bear risked her life to protect her cub." After a long period of silence that was only broken by the gentle breeze, some of the villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, a man with sharp eyes full of contemplation steps forward. "Thomas, if you genuinely think they're worth helping." He stated that none of us would put ourselves in danger for them. "Therefore you will have to accept responsibility." Thomas nodded, feeling a weak but essential sense of support. "But if you're willing to try, we won't stand in your way." He led the bears to an empty livestock shed on the village's outskirts, promising to do everything in his power. After thoroughly cleaning it, he spread dry straw to make a cozy spot for the mother bear to rest. She was almost collapsing from exhaustion, yet her eyes never left Thomas, and her gaze was now free of suspicion. Thomas carefully attended to her wound with only trust and quiet gratitude. Upon closer examination, he discovered a little bone fracture that needed stabilization, requiring precise work. However, he always thought of the cub's bright eyes full of life and hope, whenever he felt hungry. Thomas committed himself to caring for the animals in the days that followed, which initially made the villagers suspicious. Some, including children, became curious and started observing from a distance, asking Thomas questions about the bears. He described the universal power of maternal love and the bond between the mother and cub, and the significance of living in harmony with nature, as evidenced by Thomas's and the bear's words, which are dispersed across the village. He was viewed differently by those who had doubted him, not just as a veteran, but also as a brave soul. One morning, as Thomas examined the mother bear's wound, he was willing to get over his fear and do what was right. He saw that it had mostly healed and that she was able to walk and stand without bumping into the club. She was now stronger and more energized. Thomas smiled, his heart bursting with relief and joy as he remained near her, lively and playful. He was aware that it was almost time to say goodbye, but instead of feeling sad, he felt proud. In addition to saving 2 lives, he had changed the perspective of an entire community, which many believed was impossible. The gentle sunlight penetrating through the clouds in the morning was a testament to their dedication to nature. The biting cold seems to ease as it illuminates the small village in the distant forest. As Thomas stood by the livestock shed, seeing the mother bear and her cub, he brought a feeling of freshness and hope. The mother bear had fully recovered and was walking with strength and confidence after playing in the dry straw. Although the cub was no longer the frightful little creature it had been initially, Thomas had anticipated his arrival today. Thomas clenched his hands, and his heart heavy on the day they had to say goodbye, because he knew it was the right thing to do. To the forest, where the mother bear and her cub could live freely and pursue their innate desires. But deep down he didn't want to let them go. He had grown to view them as more than just untamed animals in need of assistance during the previous few weeks. However, as companions on a journey that had given his life purpose, the villagers gathered around the shed while the adults maintained a cautious distance. A few children gazed at the club with longing eyes in silence and respect. Everyone recognized this as a unique moment in the Thomas and the Bear story. Had evolved into a representation of harmony and devotion between nature and humanity. Thomas opened the shed door and entered. There were no words or gestures as he knelt down to meet the mother bear's gaze. He gently stroked the fur around her shoulder, sensing her warm breath against his hand, but they were able to understand one another. Instead of pulling away or growing right away, the bear lowered her head slightly as a gesture of gratitude. You must go back to your house now that he has broken his silence. But I will always remember you and your friend." Thomas's heart melted when the mother bear lightly licked his hand, and he grinned despite his eyes shining with unshed tears. From a safe distance, the villager followed Thomas as he led the mother bear and her cub out of the village. They walked together, silent, through sparse forest and deeper into the woods along a snowy pass. When they arrived at a clearing close to the cave where Thomas had initially seen them, the trees grew denser. He halted a gentle breeze that rustled the trees, bringing with it the fragrant aroma of damp leaves and wood. "They belonged here." Thomas turned to the mother bear. "And I knew you would take good care of your cub." The last time the mother bear looked at him, her eyes held an inexplicable sense of gratitude, trust, and maybe a little farewell. She gave a low growl that was almost like a farewell. Thomas stood watching as they vanished among the trees after turning slowly and allowing her to enter the forest. His chest had a hollow feeling, but it was accompanied by a strong sense of pride. In addition to saving lives, not everyone has the opportunity to learn from the creatures they have aided. Finally, the elderly man who had before questioned him stood silently behind him, put a hand on Thomas's shoulder, and stepped forward. "You did the right thing, Thomas." And you reminded us all that occasionally. Thomas nodded with a faint smile. "The strongest thing we can offer is passion." Thomas no longer felt cold, but he did feel lighter as the wind blew by, carrying the chill of winter. He was aware that he would keep doing what he believed in, regardless of how challenging the road ahead would be. Years later, whenever Thomas went through that forest, he helped the vulnerable and inspired those around him with a sense of purpose. He never saw the mother bear and her cub again, but he would pause and gaze into the dense trees. However, he constantly felt their presence as a silent reminder that sacrifice and devotion are always remembered, and he realized that he had done the right thing in those moments, not just for the two creatures. However, Thomas's journey with Mother Bear and her cub has come to an end for him personally. However, the lessons they imparted through their story will stick with us. It is proof of the strength of dedication, how small acts of kindness can change lives, and the magical connection between humans and nature. We appreciate you reading this story, and we hope it touched your heart and motivated you to value the lives of those around you. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to share it with your friends, regardless of how big or small it is. And subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Let's disseminate a love of nature and kindness to everyone. I'll see you on the next journey. Thank you.